Welcome to BFCN Shorts. On this episode we've got Tim Jones who's here to tell us about Saudi Arabia. It went on for a bit longer, so maybe not a short, but tons of great insight. I'm sure you'll enjoy.
Doing really well. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, you're here to talk to us about Saudi Arabia. Can you tell us where you were?
Yeah, so I lived in what we call King Abdullah Economic City, and worked in the Western Province. So the city that most people will know of is Jeddah.
And how long were you there?
I was there for about a year and a half. The way the contract went meant that I was actually back in the UK for just over 2 months during that time. But yeah, about a year and a half in total.
Oh, not bad. Some opportunities in the Middle East I know come with a decent amount of holiday time. So were you able to use that effectively?
Yeah, the contract that I had, because of the heat, the franchise I was working for wouldn't coach during that time. It just wasn't feasible to get the kids out and playing. So we would return to the UK for 2 months, nearly 3 months. So yeah, it was great to have that time. I was doing my master's at the time, distance learning. So it was a really good opportunity to go home, regroup, study, but also to spend some time with family that I hadn't been able to do before.
We'll talk about the heat in a second and how it affects the football. Before,
Sure.
what was it that appealed to you initially about the job and about Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, so what I was looking for was, I was living in Wales, South Wales. I was studying there. I was working for Bristol Rovers, Football Beyond Borders, studying. I was working for the university as well. I had a lot of different things going on, which was wonderful. I was developing experience. I was looking for an opportunity to put all of those things together within one role that would really support what I was doing with my master's studies. And this one came up. I applied to the job as I was applying to many. During the interview with the director, just really there was an accord of what it was going to be about, how it was going to be delivered, what the job was. And it was quite an exciting time to go and to really build what was effectively a new program, and put into place all this theory that was running around my head.
What is the football infrastructure like over there?
Yeah, so this is a couple of years ago now, so it may have changed a little bit. There was no league structure, there was no youth league. So although that wasn't a problem or an issue when I first got over there, it quickly became something that we wanted to address. I actually put a league together ourselves with schools, other franchises within that province. I believe something of that ilk is now still happening, which is nice, a little bit of a legacy. But that was missing. And the understanding of using competition to support development was, even though it was a league that we'd put together, we'd set up certain rules and conditions, it very quickly became about winning. and I guess that's understandable when there hadn't been exposure to it. So that is something that's building there, and they're getting more used to of having an actual youth league and regular games. What we were finding is that we were training these kids 2-3 times a week for what? They weren't then playing the real thing. In terms of academy stuff, what was quite interesting is we had 1 or 2 kids who were good enough and were looked at by Al Ahly and others. We had one who was Saudi American, dual citizen, and because of that, they didn't take him on. So again, I don't know whether it's the case right now, but certainly at the time, academy football, you had to be Saudi, and that was a real shame for this particular kid because he was a very good player.
That sounds very similar to Kuwait, or it's just next door, where it's a lot of soccer schools, it's a lot of uh, kind of franchise clubs, and even some of the private schools. And there's very little support from the federation or from the FA, and it's up to groups like us to almost make it to invent them. But then, like you said, not everyone plays by those same rules. Not everyone's got the same philosophy on development. And I remember we played our soccer school against another soccer school, and it was under 15s friendly, and they had a 21-year-old playing for them.
Amazing.
Yeah. So it sounds very, very similar to that. Is there much in the way of facilities? Is it mainly AstroTurf because of the heat? I imagine a fair bit of money as well. Surely there's some good resources at least.
Yeah, you're right that it is often turf. It varied massively, and that area, if you drive through Jeddah, I mean, there's been some huge changes in that area of the world over the last couple of years. Keep in touch with a few people. But whilst I was there, you'd be driving and it'd be these beautiful buildings, beautiful facilities, and then like right next to it, completely derelict, and then right next to that, beautiful buildings again. So it was just this cycle of top quality facilities and absolutely nothing. I was really fortunate to work for the most part in a place called Kaust, which is a university compound, and they had more fields than we could use, both grass and turf. And actually, we shifted around the compound to make use of those fields and make use of slightly different environments. Because the way that those people live, they've become very used to what is quite a fake life, quite a westernized life in that compound. And when we tried to move from one field to another, I got several complaints from parents that their kid would now have to walk another 10 minutes to practice, which yeah was really quite amusing to then have to deal with. And that was something that was a cultural thing that I didn't expect I was going to have to deal with, was that entitlement and misunderstanding of that we weren't just a service the same as they expected to treat others.
You're ringing so many bells for me in Q8. One kid didn't have a shin pad, couldn't understand. Every week they try and pull it. Oh no, coach, I forgot my shin pad. Oh no. Well, you can't play then. It's a club rule. Oh, can't you just make this one exception? And one kid tried to push it and ended up sending his chauffeur home to retrieve his shin pads. And yeah, it like what you're describing, it felt like you were beneath them in several ways, and you were nothing more than the service you were providing. Not to all of them, but to
For
some
sure.
of them.
Well, and it also then meant that the adjustment in what I thought my role was, that for quite a number of those kids that I was working with, it was then about teaching them those types of life skills that they weren't getting exposure to within their personal and family life. And that's not their fault. It's not the family's fault. It's just that was the environment that they're in. So it's understandable that they would have those behaviors. So trying to help them to understand that those behaviors aren't appropriate within our little setting was quite jarring for them. So being patient, but also making sure that you're holding those boundaries. I think that would be the thing that I learned the most, was about where my boundaries are and how to hold them with both players and families.
Did that improve that side of your coaching game, your ability?
Yeah, definitely it did. I would say that being exposed to Arab parents who just have a much greater desire for their kids to be the best thing ever, made it quite difficult sometimes to temper that, but temper it in a way that was understood that we both love their kid We both want them to do as well as they can. We both want them to improve, but also where the reality is. I mean, I had one parent, bless him, who was a lovely guy. We actually had 5 kids of his in our program, who asked me if one of his children ran like Ronaldo. And the kid was 9. So it was, again, being patient with understanding where that was coming from, which is just this pure desire for their kid to be great, and using that in an appropriate way rather than just dismissing it.
So it's interesting what you say about parents. I'd like to try and draw a comparison because I'm sure many coaches listening will have worked in the US, not all, but many. You're now in California, and you've been to some other states as well, haven't you, for coaching?
I have been before, yeah. This is my 3rd time coaching in the States. Yeah.
So, for reference, how would you compare Saudi parents to American parents?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm going to slightly sidestep the question by saying that the environment that I was in Saudi probably produced some of the behaviors from parents and from families, and from European and American parents who were living in that compound. So not just from, Arabian parents. I think the main difference would be their understanding of the game. What I have often found in the States is that they don't watch the game. They don't know it. As a result, you're teaching young people different things about the game that you perhaps wouldn't have to back home because they'd have an inherent sense of it. I actually found for our higher tier teams, you group by ability. A lot of those players were watching a lot of football, watching a lot of European football, and watching with their dads. So that's wonderful. But of course, you then get the problem of, well, dad knows a lot more about football and will tell kids certain things about it that are actually contradictory to what you're trying to do or trying to teach them. So either way, you end up with these slightly different issues. But I would say that what I came to learn was that, as I said before, once you reach that common ground and they understand that you really do want the best for their child, they'll do anything to help that.
How else does it benefit you as a coach?
Personally, at the time, it was being able to move away from what was quite a life of turmoil because I was doing so many different things. So it gave me that opportunity to just to move away from that, literally, right? Physically move away from that, and then find that headspace to be able to understand what I wanted next, study at the time. In terms of my physical coaching, we started as Arsenal, and that was much more a games-based approach. We then transitioned to Juventus, and the culture and structure of the Juventus franchises has much more unopposed work. Coming from Bristol Rovers Academy and my previous studies, I was very much more a games-based approach style coach. That's where I felt more comfortable. So it was really uncomfortable to begin with. You've got an hour 10 session, hour 15 session, and 40 minutes of this is going to be unopposed. With kids who are used to having you run games-based approaches sessions as well. So you're suddenly different as coach. They can't make the same understanding that, oh, this is going to be different. Looking at me going, why are you so different just because we're putting on a different uniform? So the challenge was how to do that and make it authentic to me. And ultimately, I don't think I ever managed that. And it was probably one of the factors as to why I then left that role.
I want to obviously keep this short because it is supposed to be a short interview, but there's a lot of good in there. From your experience and your opinion on this, how much of I think it's a difficult question. I've got to word it right. Well, difficult in there's going to be probably a lot of content to this. So you're talking about you've gone from games-based approach to unopposed. And then we have to factor in the environment. So how the kids are raised, the parental expectations, and also the weather being boiling hot.
Mm-hmm.
Does one approach, is it more favorable in that kind of environment? Are the kids more open to one or the other? Is there perhaps a benefit to that switch, or is there one that's kind of more optimum, if that makes sense? I know what I'm trying to ask.
I know what you're trying to ask. It's fine. So the problem, and perhaps why the taking your time over that question is, I think the context of that is, had I been more au fait with delivering in an unopposed way, and that was more towards my philosophy, maybe it would have been more successful, or maybe my sessions would have been more successful because it would have been more authentic to me. What was more authentic to me at the time was almost purely a games-based approach. That has since changed, and this certainly was influenced by my time with Juventus for the better. But to have this wild shift between, occasionally doing unopposed work, using warm-ups and arrival activities to encompass that kind of work, to the vast majority of your session is this unopposed delivery, was very difficult. We actually had pretty good support from Juventus that wasn't prevalent from or present rather from Arsenal. In terms of a training course, I took a training course in Turin. We had a gentleman come to see us pretty regularly to show us some of how that might be delivered. But you're quite right that the environment that we were then in and delivering in that way was very, very challenging because of the heat, because you only have the kids sometimes twice a week. Those that you do have twice a week often don't really want to learn that kind of stuff. Really, they are just there to play games and just to enjoy football for what it is. So we had slightly more success with our higher ability groups, partly because we worked with them 3 times a week. So the balance that I then struck was that third session was then more games-based approach, just to kind of balance those things. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. I'm also thinking when I've been in hot places, and I am very much down the games-based approach end of the spectrum, but there's times where it's been 35, 40 degrees and the kids want to run around and play a match and you'd be dead in 5 minutes. So no, for the next half an hour, you're going to stand in lines and wait. Work to rest ratio is going to be appallingly bad, but that's because of the heat. And so sometimes we have to factor that in. And the other thing being the behavior. I know that some kids, their motivation levels might be quite low. So if it's unopposed, then they are less bothered, they're less motivated, they don't put in as much effort. So with the heat, with the shift in that philosophy, it could potentially present some problems. And I'll refer to working in schools. When I've had to follow a kind of a constant kind of a back and forth, unopposed, isolated technical practice kind of model, yeah, there are some kids that do really good, but the troublemakers, they have time to wait. They've got time where they're disengaged, and so they become worse, and their behavior issues are, they almost skyrocket. Whereas when we've used more inclusive, more dynamic, more games-based, more competitive curricula, the troublemaking kids are less problematic because they're kept busy. And so factoring in the expectations of the kids, factoring in the heat, factoring in what they've been used to for the philosophy, it's a lot. It's quite a shift, if that makes sense. I mean, is there particularly one that is better suited to those kids in that environment?
Yeah, that's a good reflection. On reflection of my own practice, delivering that unopposed stuff, I often would do it twice. So it might be that they, one's going north, one going south, or it'd be, alongside each other, so that there were less kids waiting. There was more activity. And as a result, my work to rest ratios were quite small. It would be really 60 seconds hard intensity, followed by, nearly 90 seconds of hold your horses, let's talk about it, maybe grab a drink, and then back in. Of course, what you run out of is things to talk to them about. and you don't want to just be continually having the same conversation or continually telling them the same things. Ultimately, for me, it didn't mesh. And as I said, it was one of the reasons why I ended up leaving it. It wasn't quite aligned to how I wanted to be as a coach, certainly at that time. I know for others it fitted better, and they're still there.
All right, back on track, because apologies for the tangent. I know that people expect these ones to be a bit shorter, but I feel that was entirely relevant because coaching in Saudi Arabia is quite a unique, novel experience that there are more things to consider. And so that's why I wanted to just dive a bit deeper on that one. Now, how did working, living, coaching in Saudi Arabia benefit you as a person?
Well, I think I mentioned before then about moving away from what was quite a busy life. Otherwise, actually living on my own for a while was very beneficial. It being a dry country, that was something I welcomed. I'm not particularly a big drinker at the time, but dropping alcohol entirely was good. You can get it if you really want to find that kind of, alcohol. It is possible. I didn't particularly seek it out, and that was actually something that was useful to me. It also taught me again some further resilience of these were long days in the sun. It was hard work because I was senior coach, so I was running 3 programs, looking after 3 other staff, and then I'm on the field for 2 or 3 sessions a night as well. So I'm making sure that I was healthy during that time was really tough. I think I became a little bit unhealthy to begin with until I sort of settled down and actually found a really good rhythm. And that's something that I've taken off with me to the rest of my career.
What are some of the best things about living and working in Saudi Arabia?
Once you really get into that community and the parents understand that you are there for good, for the good of their kids, they really embrace you. Both Arab parents and we obviously had a lot of European and American and South African. So getting to know the families and being invited around for dinner and those kinds of things, that was really wonderful moments. One of my best experiences, believe it or not, was actually watching Tiesto in a concert in Cake, which was the first time that they'd had that. They had the golf tournament in that compound at the same time. So things have moved on. There are much more things that you can go and see. The F1 is in Jeddah now. So yeah, it'd be interesting to go back and see what else you can now get involved in.
What were some of the challenges of working there?
A big challenge is understanding their culture of work. So one of the things that you'll hear all the time is inshallah, which essentially means if God wills it, which is a lovely sentiment, but it's often used to mean no. But they don't say no because they don't want to upset you or to seem that way. it's worthwhile thinking of that as I might have to do this myself, that I'm actually not going to get the help. So one of the big challenges was at the beginning, we'd get buses for going to have a game in a different city or whatever, and you turn up and there's no buses. Because I had assumed too much that this had been taken on by the other people within the compounds that were working for that kind of stuff. You've got to check on everything all the time. Otherwise, there are things that just won't get done.
I found that, to me, inshallah was more like, if I wake up tomorrow and I can be asked, then yes, I'll do it.
Sure. Yeah, as well as one of my colleagues put it, is, when they say inshallah, no, you do it. He'll help you, but you do it. Get it done. Yeah, it's well worthwhile remembering that quite often people within kind of admin jobs within these compounds are just trying to get things off their desk. Yeah. So if they can bat you away, then they definitely will. And unfortunately, you need them to help your service.
Apart from maybe the heat and the lack of alcohol and the issues around inshallah, what may have took some adjusting to?
Certainly the calls for prayer, which you get very used to. You stop waking up early in the morning to the noise. That was something that I did, in the first sort of couple of months, because you're just not used to it. But getting used to how life powers down during that time is certainly a bit of a culture shock, and something that actually then becomes part of your rhythm. You kind of end up assimilating that into, I guess, your circadian rhythm, and expecting it at certain times, and almost powering down yourself in different ways, which wasn't an unhealthy thing.
When it comes to the call to prayer, because it happens in a lot of countries, and it seems to be different in each one. So in Dubai, I felt it was hardly even noticeable at times, and in Kuwait it was loud, but we didn't necessarily stop. And then
Sure.
I've heard it in Morocco and Qatar as well. It's kind of varying degrees of how much it affects the pace of life. So were you still coaching during the call, or did everything stop?
No, quite often coaching, and there'd sort of be this time frame that especially the older kids would need to be gone by, and this was also true of when they fasted. We would adjust the time of practices so that they fell at more appropriate times for them. It's something you have to be aware of in terms of what physical output they can do as well. And then also just us being respectful of it. It's no good you being on the sidelines downing a bottle of water whilst the players you're working with are busy fasting. So, it is something you need to be respectful of, just in terms of these are the people that I'm working with, and I need to not assimilate, but I need to show respect for what it is that they do in terms of their lifestyle.
What were some of the misconceptions you've experienced, likely in the form of strange questions from friends and family before heading to Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, once they get over you're going where? Because it seems like such a strange place to go. I suppose because I traveled on my own to the States previously, some friends and family would have already been aware that I was, have that wandering feet and quite happy to go and travel. But, Saudi definitely comes up as a place that people are a bit more shocked, even when I tell them now that I've, worked and lived there. Some of the misconceptions are around, what your living conditions are going to be like. There's these ideas that you're just going to be hot all of the time because there'll be no AC, or there'll be no facilities, and it depends where you go. Sometimes that can be true, but very often it's not. Other misconceptions would be around the religious side. you know, and whether you're going to end up converting. I've definitely been asked that, you know, either was I tempted to, or was I going to be coerced into, and that never happened. What I actually found is that my experiences of Christianity has been more push that down your throat than Islam was. If you wanted to talk about it, if you wanted to talk about the religious side, more than open, and would love to talk to you about it. I was invited into the mosque at the compound that I worked in. Amazing building. Definitely take that up as an opportunity if you get the opportunity in those kinds of countries. But I found that they would be immediately respectful of not talking about it, you know, and continually asking, you know, how much did you want to know? So there was a mutual respect for, you know, where I came from, what my culture was, whilst respecting their laws. So what was quite different, though, is when you're in compounds and when you weren't. You know, when you were just sort of outside of compounds within Jeddah, you were much more aware of some of those customs that you needed to adhere to. But yes, misconceptions. I think the big one was around religion and whether I would end up converting to Islam.
Yeah, that's a big can of worms. And my experience for going was essentially that Islam was synonymous with lots of other words like terrorist, which comes from the stigma that a lot of, frankly, ignorance and racism that we have here. And for coaches that are listening, I don't want them to have that kind of fear or to be susceptible to that kind of nonsense, because it can hold you back from what is a brilliant life experience, an opportunity to go and live in some interesting places and this, get off this island and go see the rest of the world, because there's so much out there to see and do. But don't be susceptible to those biases, those ignorances, and you know, those. It is, in so many ways, it is essentially just racism. It's born out of different things, but yeah, that's what some of the questions that I've heard from other coaches, and I've had directed at myself as well. That's not how life works. Before I went to Kuwait, I was watching the movie Zero Dark 30, you know, where the Americans go and get Osama bin Laden, and there was a scene in there where one of the agents went and met the contact in Kuwait City, and suddenly my mum's worried. But you're going there? So, yeah, look, he's in a nice restaurant meeting the contact. There's nothing bad happening on the screen right now. Bad stuff happened in other countries that I'm going nowhere near. Relax, but it's because it's kind of all lumped together in one,
Right.
almost like synonymous blob of they're all the same, rather than for each country, each city. I mean, over here we're not all the same. You go 10 minutes down the road in England, it's a different accent. Other countries are even richer and more diverse in that culture and on their standards. And so Saudi Arabia is a big one. There was a lot of misconceptions, a lot of stigmas, a lot of things that people need to be aware of. And so I'm glad you brought that up. And I don't want to waste any more time and get more to the point, but you said you would be open to talking about religion. So if anyone's listening, would it be all right if they contacted you separately if they have any further questions on that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm not a particularly religious person myself, but I'd be happy to talk to them about, you know, what the customs are there, things that you would need to be, you know, aware of, that will make that transition to that area a little bit smoother.
Okay, thank you very much for that, because always say that the best coaches are more generous with their time, because ultimately it comes from the intrinsic want and desire to see others do well. So thank you for that. So last few questions: living standards. You mentioned that as one of the misconceptions, and again, yeah, I lived in a nice apartment with a pool and a gym, and it's really good. And people thinking, Kuwait, what's that? So Saudi Arabia What are the living standards like there?
Yeah, when I arrived, what had originally been um, offered was not great. Um, it was perfectly fine, but I actually didn't end up living in that place. It was like a studio apartment, but there was no safety really to the place. You couldn't lock the door, which now maybe or later I would have been fine with, but because I was just new to the country, like that felt very uncomfortable. Um, and there weren't really proper cleaning facilities and stuff like that. What I then moved into was this beautiful apartment that was, about as westernized as you could imagine, really. Obviously had you knew you were in Saudi Arabia, but um, beautiful place, 1 bedroom apartment, ensuite shower, your own kitchen. I mean, really couldn't have asked for much more. The compound that I lived in also had a go-karting track that we occasionally used. It had a cinema that we actually didn't end up going into. They just allowed films not long before I then left. As I said, I ended up seeing a concert there. I was about 100 yards away from Tiesto at one point, which was amazing. So the living standards are much higher than you would expect, I think. Some of my colleagues were living in the compound of a school that we worked in. Again, really nice apartments. You were very comfortable there. So I think it would be unfair of me to say that that's the case across the country or across everyone's experiences, but generally speaking, living in compounds, you're in nice places. These are built for purpose.
What exactly is a compound? I've had a look when I've researched the jobs and see kind of what the idea is, but could you paint a picture for someone who's got no idea what a compound is like to live on in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, look, they vary, but generally speaking, there'll be some kind of gates that you'll need either a card or your passport to get through to confirm that you do live in that place, and that really is just for the safety of everyone that's within that area. It is also used to kind of segregate a little bit as well. They're just a bit more obvious about it. And then depending on the size of the place that you go, those gates will look very different. There were ones that we went to where there are gun turrets because they are looking after those places. And I mean, the university compound that I worked in, there's some really high level facilities and equipment and things going on that they rightfully want to protect. So it's just about being able to show that you are a resident or that you are a service worker, just like you would scan a card to go into an office building.
You mentioned guns and gates. Doesn't sound safe, but how safe is it realistically?
In the compounds, I felt totally safe. I probably as safe as I've ever felt. Who is in, who is out, are the residents or workers of that place. In terms of experiencing things like theft, I never heard of anything, and that's partly because of their culture, partly because of their religious beliefs. It's just not a thing, certainly within those smaller environments. You could encounter problems if you weren't looking for them, especially in sort of older parts of or poorer parts of Jeddah. But whenever I was in the compounds, and certainly where I was living, genuinely the safest I've ever felt in terms of a living situation.
What kind of things could you do for fun there?
Yeah, I mentioned the go-karting. I love that. There was like a little mini golf area as well. Every Friday is your day off because that's a holy day for that part of the world. So myself and colleagues, we would often use that as an opportunity to rest, relax, sit around a pool, swim. And then there was a hotel in the compound as well that had a really nice restaurant. So we'd often go there, play cards, that kind of thing.
What was it like trying to integrate into society, or is your kind of friend circle is that surrounded the job? Is it with other Westerners in the compound? How does that work?
Yeah, your closest people are your colleagues, and I was very fortunate that the colleagues that I had, a couple of them are still very good friends now, and at times they were vital, and they get you through, some of those more challenging moments. So making friends with colleagues and making sure you're you're with good people is really, really important. When we had some slightly less helpful people around, it was understandably worse. But otherwise, yeah, your friends are often other Westerners within the compounds. But I also made friends with locals, and again, I mentioned Tiesto. It was obviously an important experience for me whilst I was there, it seems. But one of the reasons I was able to get so close during the concert was I was friends with a security guard. He helped me get through, and this is what I mean, that it's very much a culture of, if you're seen to be genuine and authentic and you're helpful and you want the best for them and their country to some extent, they'll move things for you and really try to make sure that you have a good experience.
Final question. I know this has been a long short, but I think you've been great and got a lot of good stuff out here, which would be very valuable to people listening and interested in Saudi Arabia. Final one. What advice would you give to someone considering working in Saudi Arabia?
Really consider the distance and how long you're going to be there, and have in place times where you are going to leave and you're going to be elsewhere. So I think one of the reasons I ended up leaving perhaps is I spent too long there and just like laser focused on what the job was, rather than trying to travel a little bit. I mean, the beautiful countries in and around the Middle East and so, I mean, one of my colleagues went to Syria, and I wish I'd gone with him. It looked like he had an incredible time. So it's well worth putting those things in place as quickly as you can, but also then having those times where you're coming back to Europe, you're coming back to the UK to spend time with family and friends, or whatever it is that you want to be doing.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thanks to Tim for coming on. We have more interesting locations on the way. If there's somewhere you'd like to tell us about, just get in contact. We'd love to hear your stories.